Hi everyone. So Kamil will join in a second. So yeah, like Naomi said, I'm Uri, and I'm also a freelance developer. And I worked on the Apollo and Meteor teams. Yeah, and today I'm going to talk with you about GraphQL, but anywhere. So all kinds of new use cases that are now possible with GraphQL that you probably haven't heard about or haven't thought about, that I think can change a lot of the way we develop our front-end apps today. And I'm probably going to focus more on the front-end side and the state management part. But first, I would actually give maybe a half long introduction to GraphQL, just so you know what it is, and also all the recent updates that happened recently that will give me the opportunity to demo you today, basically 3 versions of an app that for me is kind of the way forward in data management. So GraphQL is basically a query language for data, any data. So basically any data that you can think about, all the things that you need to do with GraphQL is to describe it in a simple schema, and then to describe the data requirements, like the queries that you want. And with GraphQL, you get exactly that. You get exactly what you want in the typings that you want and in the shape that you want it. How does that work? Because a lot of people are just talking about it, they don't show how it actually works. So the first thing you do is basically you start and write your schema. And the schema is a very simple thing, like you can see it on the bottom left or right. And basically here it describes a user and a message, but it also describes not their fields, but also their relationships. Now, it's not that hard, like writing this schema, but what it created for us, just from writing those static analyzable types, it created us this weird box in the middle that you don't need to write. So this weird box in the middle, let's call it a GraphQL engine, just from us describing the schema, would be able to do a lot of cool things. For example, if I'm a client and I just want to get specific user and the user's name. So I send one request, and then this engine will start analyzing my request, get all the information that I need, like the user and then the user's name, and send it back to me in one single response that looks exactly like my query. So that query can actually look like my templates. So the only thing that I need to do is to describe what data I want and how it shapes, and then just get it back as an observable and render it. So if now I'll add another requirement, for example, for the messages of the user, which is a relationship and their content, then the same thing will happen. I will first get the user, then I'll get the user name and messages, but then let's say that maybe the content is actually even coming from a third-party API. So what will happen is that the GraphQL engine will understand that and call that third-party API, merge all that information into one single response in the shape that I asked for, and I'll get one single response in exactly the shape that I want. And I don't care, I don't know as the client how I got this response. So the most expensive part, which is the part it's the internet, between the client and the server, is the most lean one. Just one request, one response. But from just describing this schema, I get way more tooling. So for example, what you see here, you will get also on your IDEs, and this is for your API. So you can get auto-completion, type validation, error handling, and also free docs by just writing that schema. And you don't need to write docs and API docs ever again. So this is very powerful, and usually this is how people display GraphQL, but there's more. So recently, what we thought was, wait, if we can generate all those stuff automatically, maybe we can generate more things. So we created the GraphQL code generator, which this tool basically takes into account that you can generate anything and gives you the power to build templates. So now we can have an ecosystem of templates. If some of you heard about Swagger Generator or stuff like that, you can basically take those schemas and generate anything. What do I mean by anything? TypeScript typings is the obvious example. But what I've showed 2 weeks ago in another talk, you can generate a complete backend. So you can write your schema and then add some ORM information on top of your schema with directives, and then just generate a complete working backend from just writing the schema. And I demoed it in a lightning talk 2 weeks ago, so you can check it out. And the thing is that you can do whatever you want. So for example, you can even generate Swagger definitions from your GraphQL definitions, and then generate from the Swagger definitions REST endpoints. So you just write GraphQL and you get REST endpoints and their documentation for free. And then there's another thing that is very dear to my heart, which is RealTime. And there's a lot of real-time solutions out there. And real-time basically is a big subject. I gave this talk, the title was real-time, but this time I'm going to talk about something just on the client side. But 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk in ReactiveConf about the whole overview of just this subject. So here I'm going to just talk very, very little about that. So there's a lot of solutions about real-time, but there's two main questions that I'm always bothered with, which is, what if I don't have a magical reactive backend, like Firebase or RethinkDB? Most of us has just an existing old backend, but we still want to push real-time updates to our users. And the second thing is, if we're using something which is awesome like Firebase, what happens if one day we want to migrate from Firebase? How much of the code do we need to change? So having that in mind and having worked at Meteor and doing a lot of real-time stuff, I joined the joint team between the Facebook, with the GraphQL team at Facebook and some people from Apollo, and we basically came together to build a new open source protocol over GraphQL to send real-time updates. So there was a lot of work there. It's ended up with those 2 PRs that you see. One was from Rob Zhu from Facebook PRing the GraphQL spec, and one was myself PRing the official reference implementation to add subscriptions into the spec, and then we announced it in GraphQL Summit, in GraphQL Europe, so you can basically use it today. I'm not going to dive deep into that, but basically what it means is that we're querying from the client exactly like before, like you saw before, but this time we also have a box on our GraphQL server that anything can fire events into it. So for example, if I have an old server, I can just, once I saved my post message into my old SQL server, I can just send the function to just notify the GraphQL server something happened, and then the GraphQL server will do the whole process that it did before. So on my client, for me, it just looks like I was subscribed to message added. Every time a message was added, I got exactly the data that I want, no more, no less. And this can work on anything, including an IoT bridge. So anything can activate these real-time applications. And another thing that I show there is, what do I do if I have a reactive backend? And like Firebase, I can also hook it up into that. And then I can change my reactive backend. I can do some reactive, some non-reactive. So this is part of the open source work that we did, or I've done, and other people in Facebook and Apollo for the last few months. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm sorry that I dove too much into it, but just there were some people that were angry at me that they didn't have too much resources on how to actually use it. So here it is. There's complete server and Angular app that uses both GraphQL subscriptions, GraphQL live queries with RxJS. So there's no more excuses. Just go in and try it. Now, the last thing that happened that made me be able to talk about the thing that I want to talk about today was the new Apollo Client 2.0 release. But instead of me talking about it, maybe I'll just invite the person who actually wrote this thing, which is Kamil. So let's welcome Kamil.
Okay, hi guys. I'm Kamil, no introduction, straight to the content. So this is the part of my talk, and it's called Apollo Redefined, and we will get through this redefined thing. So what is Apollo? Apollo is a GraphQL client. It allows you to, it manages the network, and it has a caching mechanism. So the data is stored, it's normalized, and it's stored flat. Yeah, and it's component-based. So thanks to those features like storage, like managing the network and also having the caching mechanism, you can even do things like query batching, for example, which is batching all queries and sending in as a one single request. And with the caching, you can have like optimistic UI, which is, let's say you have you manipulate the data, you make a change, and you apply that change immediately to the UI, and then after you get the result, you can just update the UI once again. So you can just update the UI immediately after the change happens. And the good part is that, important part is that you have two libraries actually. Apollo client is like a central place for all the logic that happens, and Apollo Angular is just an aggregation. So you have, like, Apollo supports many popular frameworks, and that's not more. There is also support for Android, Swift, NativeScript, even Meteor. And Apollo right now is the most popular GraphQL client. And about the tools around it. So you can also use a tool which is a plugin for Chrome, and it's called Apollo Client DevTools. And it allows you to see in detail what are the queries you're calling, the mutations. Also, you can see the store. So you can just see, as you can see, here it's a normalized store. You can see all the values, and everything changes. You can see the change. And it also has a GraphQL, which Uri showed you. So you can just run queries inside your browser against the actual GraphQL endpoint, which is cool. So why redefined? We've got the Apollo 2.0. It came out a few weeks ago, and it's faster, smaller, stuff like this. But the more important part is that you have a pluggable cache, and it opens up for things like Redux, NGRX, MobX, anything you want. It allows you to even optimize those caches because you no longer stick to Redux. And it also introduced the concept of links. So it's like a network stack. You can use it. And about the links. So imagine you have to make a request to fetch data from the GraphQL endpoint. You just type something like this, HTTP link. And it uses the fetch API of the browser. And I created the Apollo, like the Apollo version of that link, which uses the HTTP client of Angular, like Angular's HTTP client. And this is as simple as that. And imagine if you want to retry it, like when let's say an error occurs on something like this, you can just execute the query 5 times or less in a delay of this. And the good thing is that those links can be chainable, so you can merge even the retry link with HTTP link and with other links, which is there will be a lot more links in the community thanks to that. So let's talk about Apollo Angular. So it's now in beta, and it fixed basically all the issues we have. It's way closer to Angular because it depends on it lives inside the dependency injection, so you can use any service you want, anything you want as a middleware. And since it's based on the HTTP client, you can do some interceptions, anything you want. And thanks to that HTTP client thing, we get the server-side rendering just like that, without any additional work. And also, we gain the NativeScript support, which is pretty cool. And since it's server-side rendered, you can just use a store recursion. So this is an example how you would apply this with the transfer state API introduced in Apollo 5. But what if I say it's way more simple than that? You can just use the transfer module for caching the HTTP request from the NG Universal team, and you can just apply it, and it works this way. Like you can it makes queries on the server, and when the client calls this request, you get it immediately because it's in the cache. So that's cool. And about the NativeScript, it's so simple. You can just include 2 modules, one for HTTP link, and the second, which is Apollo itself. Yeah, and it's in beta, but let's change it. So let's just, yeah, it will be cool. So let's just publish the first. I've got the script, which is, oh, okay, now it works. So instead of npm publish, I run the script npm run deploy, and we will see the version 1.0, the official 1.0 of Angular Apollo. And you can check it out, you can use it anytime you want. So let's wait. It should be done in a second. Yeah, so we are done. We have a 1.0 first ever. Yeah, finally, like months of works. Okay, since it published and I'm like free to go, you can read more about New Apollo. There is a huge, comprehensive like documentation of New Apollo. It's explain everything you want to. And yeah, so that's it. Thank you, guys. Back to Uri.
Thanks, Kamil, for releasing it. Yeah, it looked simple, but like we worked on it for a lot of months. So everything that Kamil was talking about is basically the major things were a pluggable cache and the links architecture. Now the main, and he showed some examples, but this actually opens up Apollo to be kind of like a hub of any solutions that you can think of that's related to GraphQL. For me, there's one thing in particular that is super interesting. What if we could do everything that I showed you before on the server and the real time and all of the things that GraphQL gives you, but just on the client? So what? And instead of query your like server-side database or anything, you will just query NGRX, and you'll get all those benefits between your components and all your apps, so or different modules of your app. So each component can define their own queries, and they will query it the same, like actions and reducers, but instead of actions and reducers, the same language that you use for your server side. So let's see how it goes. So I created a simple server. Sorry, not a simple server. So I created an app, and it's a very, very basic app, but it's a nice app. I have a list of messages here. And each message has their content and their writer and their image, and I can also change like the selected state of that. Now, if you look at the code, let me look at like the list of. Let me increase it a bit. So this is the component that basically renders the list. Very simple component, an ng4 over the messages. So I know exactly what content, what information I want inside here, but there's a problem. There's some of the data maybe now comes from the server side, from the client side. But here, I can still just write one query that describes exactly what I want. I want messages. I want for each message to get the ID, the content, if it's selected or not, and the author, and all of the details of the author that I want to display. Exactly in the same structure of my template. So when I'll get back the value, the results, I just need to save it into messages, and that's it. I don't need to like query multiple sources or structure the data in some way. It just works. Now, this is a nice example of using GraphQL over the server. Just nothing here is over the server. Everything is local. Like you see this thing, this tag, this is at client. So that means that all of the data that you see here is basically coming from my local cache. How did we do it? So the only thing that we need to do is go and take Apollo link state, which is another Apollo link that someone from the community wrote. It's actually not someone, it's a very specific someone. It's James Bexley, the guy who wrote most of Apollo Client 2.0. Probably, even though he's not an Angular developer, you probably want to follow him. And basically that link is basically filters all the data that has a client annotations on top of it and just redirects it to my local storage. So now I can write to my local storage mutations, and I can query for my local storage data. So I do all the work that I used to do with NGRX, just I use the same language and the same capabilities that I have with GraphQL over the server. So that's really nice. So everything you see here, like every time I'm changing the data and get a new result, this is all local. So this is great. Why is it great? One thing is that I get one language for data. I don't need to, on the client, do actions and reducers, and on the server do HTTP requests, queries, mutations, all of that. I have one language. The second thing is, like you saw, my component became way easier. I just describe how the data looks, and that's it. And I get the data wherever it's coming from, including relationships. And the third thing is that we see a lot of, what we see currently is that we see a lot of like tutorials and explanations about NGRX, and all of the data that they're flowing are like local data, but those examples are actually like usually showing data that you probably would put on your server. With this thing, if you want to move from MVP now to a real server, the client doesn't need to change. You query it exactly the same way, and you move from MVP to like a real app. But there's a problem here. Usually not all of our app is, unlike all those like fancy demos, usually our data is coming from, parts come from the server and parts from the client. Not everything is on the client. So what if we could do the same, but the GraphQL engine could actually send us this data from the client and from the server and merge them all together. So let's take the same example. Just this time, what I've done is that I moved the client-side state, the client-side annotation, into just the selected field. Because that's actually the only thing that is local, right? Like everything here, the content of the message and the people are coming from my server. But the selected is coming from my local storage. Now, how would we usually do that? Usually we would fetch both of those things together, and then we would write some kind of logic to merge them together, and maybe we'd had like here kind of like when we want to display, let's say, the selected state, we do have a function is message selected, and then and it will get the ID and somehow do some logic of merge. We don't need it here. We just need to write this query, and it's done. So this is very powerful. How I've done it here, exactly the same. I just created a remote link that queries a server that I wrote here also on the browser. And I just moved a bunch of code from here to my server. And then I just, like Kamil showed you, I just concatenate and push and layer on top of each other the local link and the remote link. And now, first of all, the query will come through the local link. It will see there's this field which is local, and then it will query that from NGRX, and then it will fetch all the rest from the client. But as a client, I don't care. I don't know. I just get the data and display it, and that's it. And you can see here that I can keep changing my local state, but I'll keep getting the observable of all the state like it was one single state, remote or not. But what if we can even do that better? So, oh, wait, we did that already. So what if we didn't even need to know? And so everything I showed you right now is possible. You can use it today, and it's probably one of the best practices, or probably better than what you do today. But what if we could do better? Maybe we can remove the client-side directive at all, and we don't need to care about that. And maybe we can create a client-side schema. Like, maybe we can describe, let's say if we're building a huge Angular app, and we have tons of state, we have the same problem. We want to get a schema of all the data. We want to get docs. Even though it's like my local state, I still want to get docs. I want to write automatically, to get automatically TypeScript typings. I want to get validations when I'm querying my local state. All of that. And maybe even I want to get all these links that I showed you and run them in a web worker. Well, that's also possible. So let's go to the third version of the app. And what you see here is that this query has no concept of client or server, but still, when I'm changing my local state, I'm changing just my local state, and I get all the rest from the server. So somehow, this thing that I created here understands that I have local schema, client-side schema, and it knows how to merge them together. How did I do that? I've used a merge link that I created yesterday, and it's based, though, on like a really, really exciting work that James Beckley has done. And what I do here is basically using a very powerful new method in GraphQL that's called schema stitching. Schema stitching is a way to take few GraphQL servers or few GraphQL data sources and merge them together. Think, for example, taking the Google Maps API and the Yelp API and looking at both of those API as one single APIs, and you can query in one single query both of those. So this is schema stitching. I'm not going to go too deep into that. But what I've done here is the same thing, but instead of schema stitching two remote servers, I'm stitching together my local state, my local schema, and my remote schema. So I wrote here a schema for my local storage, and I have a remote schema on my server. I merge them together and call the links. And now my app doesn't matter if I call local state, remote state, and maybe even a third-party API. Maybe the photo of the person comes from like Cloudflare or I don't know, like all kinds of like third-party services. For me, I don't care. I just merge all those schemas. Somehow in the backend, merge all those schemas. And when I write my component, I just write one query. I get the results that I want in the shape that I want, and that's it. So this is very powerful, and it's kind of like the new things that we get. Now, another interesting thing is that maybe I can do all of that, all of the things that I showed you, but when I query the server, maybe the server is just a regular HTTP server. That's still OK. So now I don't even need to create a GraphQL middleware or talk to my backend developers. Now I can get all the power of GraphQL while still using my old REST server or my new Firebase cool data store. So as you can see, like there's a lot of new things that I showed here today. And first of all those examples, I will upload them into my GitHub repo. But one thing that I want to, for you to take away is that with the Apollo Client 2.0 and all the new things that happened in the GraphQL in the recent year or 2 years, I think we can start rethinking our best practices on how we manage data. Maybe what I've showed is a good practice, maybe not. I would love to hear your opinions. But what I think is that we have now new capabilities, new powers, and we can maybe rethink the dogmas that we use today to manage data, local or remote. Thank you.